Hi, I'm Scott, and I was diagnosed with rectal cancer, stage 3, in July of 2020. Thanks to my incredible healthcare team, I'm here now going strong in October 2024. And so it's my team and all my friends and my love of live music that's kept me going. It sprang out of my annual physical, which was in June of 2020. And during the course of that, um, my primary care physician uh, discovered there was blood in my stool sample. So he then, I was going to say recommended, it was more like insisted that I have a colonoscopy, which I then did the next month. And it was during that procedure where a tumor was discovered in my rectum. But other than, the blood in the stool during my, annual physical, I did not have or was not displaying any other symptoms. I ran kind of the gamut of emotions. The main one was, concern, obviously scared. But that being said, this was my second bout with cancer. The previous one had been 32 years prior. So I had been down the road before. Initially, I was diagnosed with testicular cancer in March of 1988. So I underwent surgery. The tumor had completely encapsulated one of my testicles. They just removed that. Um, Thankfully, it didn't spread at all. I then went through, just to be on the safe side, a course of radiation, and then I was cool for 32 years. What I did learn the first time is to, trust my team. I always said, trust the team and trust the treatment. And, you know, I really clung to that, this second go round. And the second go round, uh, it was much more extended than my first go round because I had, chemotherapy right away in 2020. And of course, also part of my diagnosis at that point, I was like, cancer during a pandemic? How's this going to work? Um, Especially with, we were only 4 months into the pandemic at that point, and, you know, eh, everything up until then was, 6 feet apart and, no social gatherings. And I was like, so, now I'm going to, go into places where there's, obviously a lot of, germs and stuff. But ultimately, I felt better. I felt safer in the White Plains Cancer Center than I did anywhere else because, so many precautions were taken. I went through chemo and lo and behold, had a CT scan and the tumor was gone. And I was like, I didn't even know that could happen during the treatment portion because my team, um, they're uh, the way they deal with it is treatment before surgery. And so I had the chemo, and because the tumor was gone, at that point, there was no need for surgery. So I went through 4 months. I still have my port. It's my badge of honor. Uh, in spite of my oncologist, you know, very strongly advising me to get it removed, I said I actually kind of like having it. I take good care of it, and we have come to a mutual agreement that next November I will have it removed. So I'll have it for another year. Anyway, um, so I went through my chemo. I'd go in to the infusion center. I'd get infused for 3 hours, and then I would be sent home with the pump for 36 hours. And then I'd come back and I'd get untethered and I'd go back in 2 weeks. And I actually got through the chemo, all things considered, well. I didn't lose any weight. I My hair thinned a little bit, but that was it. In 2021, in the winter, I started the radiation, and that actually ended up, believe it or not, taking a lot more out of me than the chemo did. Uh, I ended up losing 30 pounds during radiation, um, but I did make it through that, and then I cruised along, getting my checkups and scans every 3 months, and I was fine for 2.5 years. And then April 2023, I had endoscopic ultrasound as part of my follow-up scans, and then they found cancer cells. And as my oncologist put it, it's not that I had a relapse. They were always kind of there hiding. So at that point, I had to have surgery because they couldn't radiate, the same area again. So I had an ileostomy surgery in May of 2023, at which point I then had an ostomy bag. So that was fun. And I had that for 3 months and then had the reversal in August of 2023. I just put my head down and I just listen to them and do what I need to do. And if you had told me that I would have an ostomy bag that I would need to, consistently empty, had to change every 3 days, then have a reversal and have what they then referred to as a wound in my abdomen that I then had to take care of. I had to change the dressing every day. I mean, it was a lot, but it's amazing what you can do when you need to. Through it all, I just continued as best I could to live my life to the fullest. Uh, was still going out, seeing live music, multiple times a week. I'd be going out, have my ostomy bag, there. When I needed to, see to it, I would. Don't let it limit you. It doesn't have to be uh, a completely debilitating thing. Now, everybody's situation is different. Um, because of the location of where mine is, it was something, I could cover up, you know, as well as could be expected under the circumstances. I always wear my shirt untucked when I'm out. So, and I would, and I could still remember I'd be, sitting, at a bar or whatever, and my friends are all around, but they knew what I was going through, and I would just sit and I would lift it up and look to see what the situation is, and if I had to empty it, I would toddle off to the bathroom and you know take care of it. And it wasn't, it didn't, you know it didn't limit me, and I wouldn't let it limit me. I have always felt throughout everything, and going back to the first time I had it, the way you deal with things mentally and psychologically are almost as important to how it's dealt with medically. I refuse to let it overwhelm me. I stay, laser focused on what I need to do, and I just do it, and just continue to do the things that I love to do, things that make me happy. In the beginning of both situations, with both with the ostomy bag and then after the reversal, I did utilize visiting nurse services uh, for a couple of times a week, and they would get me comfortable doing what it is I needed to do. And once I was able to do those things on my own, then I was able to, you know, go out, go away, do all those things that make me happy. I'm proud of being a survivor, and uh, I share, I guess call it a journey with whoever's willing to hear my long-winded stories. Trust your team and trust the treatment. I don't have any tattoos, but if I was to get one, that's what it would be.